We are so honored to bring to this event Carey Gillam. Thank you so much for coming to this event. I wanted to quote to you in her own words, Carey's sense of why she does what she does. She says she's always known that she wanted to work as a journalist, to build a career on the simple pursuit of truth. My work, she says, is based on the belief that by sharing information and ideas, airing debates, and unveiling actions and events critical to public policy, we help advance our community, and she says, our humanity. And I think that's what she's done with her new book, or relatively new book, Whitewash, which received a gold medal in the 2018 Independent Publishers Book Awards. This is an incredibly important book in terms of outlining some of the things Dean just mentioned, the hiding of data, the hiding of information, the fraudulent and misleading activities that go on often to mislead the public on questions of health and safety and environmental protection. So with that, Carey, thank you so much for being here and for all the work that you do.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Ta-da. Got to get my water. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here tonight. I have to say, I feel pretty honored to be asked to speak. You guys are the people who know this stuff. A lot of you sitting out here, my sources are my people who have helped inform me and who have helped me write the book. But I do have to open with a disclaimer, which is, yes, I'm a journalist. I've been one for more than 25 years. And what that means is I am not very comfortable standing up here. I'm far more comfortable sitting where you are and listening to a presentation and then probably writing a story about it. We journalists, are not trained in conducting PowerPoint presentations. We are not oriented towards activism. I have been trained to put aside my own opinions and my own biases and to simply, stick to the facts, follow the truth, pursue the truth wherever it may lead you, how deeply it might be hidden and whoever it might offend. And with this book, I've offended quite a few people, I think. But so standing here is not comfortable for me, but I'm here both because Jay invited me to be here and because after 20-some years of writing about food and agriculture for Reuters, it's just became impossible not to do this, not to speak up, not to write a book, not to speak out, because even though you all have known this a lot longer than I have, it became abundantly clear to me that we have lost our way. I think we're out of balance in this world. And, my primary area of coverage has been food and agriculture, and I know it's so much more, but with food and ag, we've allowed pesticide-dependent agriculture to just take over the system. And I really feel that, we're putting our future generations in danger. And I have future generations. I have 3 children. So my research in the group I work for right now, U.S. Right to Know, and the research of Beyond Pesticides and so many others, has made it clear that not only are we, out of balance, but that we're out of balance by intention, very strategically so. And this is designed by, a handful, really, of very powerful companies that control the seeds and the chemicals that dominate the modern agricultural system that they have created, primarily to generate, ever greater profits. So while we are being poisoned and our future generations are being put in danger, they are counting, their profits. And that's something you can't be quiet for. All right, let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, so my primary, can you hear me okay? Do I need to lean? Okay. My primary area of focus lately, has been glyphosate. You've heard a few people talk about that already tonight. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in hundreds, actually, of herbicide products sold around the world, but most people know it as Roundup. Monsanto's branded Roundup products. Monsanto actually introduced it to the market in 1974. They had a patent on glyphosate. It was a novel herbicide. Worked great, very efficient, very effective, and so much safer, right, than other herbicides on the market. And it was pretty quickly embraced and is still to this day, very popular. Obviously, I think someone earlier today showed you a graphic, and I may even have one in here, about 300 million pounds a year now on average used in the United States. And so what this means is we're seeing it in parks and children's playgrounds and on lawns and gardens. Residential homeowners are using it, and golf course operators are using it to keep the greens neat and nice looking, right? You all know this. So many people here are so deeply involved in this, but I don't think a lot of people do realize it, how pervasive it is. And of course, it's used in food and agriculture. The EPA tracks over 70 different food crops for which glyphosate is used in conjunction in the production of these different food crops. So it's not just genetically altered corn and genetically altered soy or cotton or canola or sugar beet. It's almonds, and it's used in orange groves, and it's used on tea plantations. It is the most widely used agrochemical in the world. Let me follow my notes. But what has become of this is, and I think someone mentioned this as well, not only is it in our food, it's in our water, it's found in drinking water, it's in our soil, it's in the air, and it's in our own bodies. Very clearly, it's been found in urine tests around the world. I think some researchers here in California put out a paper just in October about that. But it's pervasive in our world today. These are just a few facts. I do want to make clear the work that I do has focused recently on glyphosate, and the book that I've written, Whitewash, focuses on Monsanto and glyphosate and how it pushed it to such prominence. But glyphosate, I consider really to be the poster child for the bigger pesticide problem. If it goes away tomorrow, we're not okay. But I do think that it's very representative of what's going on in terms of the way that it's been pushed, the way the company has manipulated public policy and the regulatory authority over glyphosate. And I'm going to get into that in my talk, but a little bit, I call them not so fun facts about pesticides. Being that I'm speaking to Beyond Pesticides, you probably already know this on the top of your head. 1 billion pounds of pesticides used in the United States every year. Approximately 5.6 billion used worldwide. U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates about 50 million people in the U.S. obtain their drinking water from groundwater that's potentially contaminated by pesticides and other ag chemicals. Glyphosate, as I said, is the world's most widely used weed-killing pesticide, but research ties it to a range of health problems, including reproductive and neurodevelopmental harms, as well as cancers. And we have this, I don't know if you all saw this, the top scientist, Linda Birnbaum, at the National Institutes of Health, wrote a paper, she and some colleagues, that came out in December, and this phrase really struck with me. She says, U.S. regulations have not kept pace with scientific advances showing that pesticides and other widely used chemicals cause serious health problems at levels previously assumed to be safe. How do we feel good about that? I mean, this is something I think was mentioned earlier as well, the agricultural health study. We know that these pesticides are tied to cancers, right? There are many studies that have been done around the world, but the ag health study is a good one to have because they have been tracking 89,000 farmers and their family members since 1993. These are farmers in Iowa and North Carolina who are exposed to a lot of pesticides, and they found overwhelming evidence of ties to a whole range here: breast cancer, ovarian, thyroid, kidney, NHL, and Parkinson's. My son's 16-year-old friend was diagnosed with cancer last year. He's a football player. 2 weeks ago, my husband's sister was diagnosed with uterine cancer. On December 14th, I lost a close, dear friend to pancreatic cancer. My tennis partner just had surgery, her second surgery last week, after going through chemo and radiation and a major surgery. Gosh, I mean, all of us, is there anyone in this room? I used to ask people to raise their hands if they knew someone that had cancer. now I raise them if you don't? I mean, I don't know, right? I mean, this is not okay, and this is why I guess I'm doing this. I don't see this getting any better. Approximately 39% of men and women in the U.S. expected to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetimes. More than 600,000 expected to die this year from cancer. More than 1.6 million expected to be newly diagnosed. Pediatric cancers, a number of types of pediatric cancers are on the rise. Worldwide, more than 14 million cases occurring each year, expected to hit 22 million by 2030. As we saw mentioned in the AHS slide, research suggests connections between pesticides and cancers like NHL, multiple myeloma, prostate, liver, pancreatic, lung. The National Toxicology Program in 2016 addressed this, and they put out a report, and the line in there that struck me was, we need to stop focusing so much on how we fix it, how we treat it, and how we live with cancer, and how we cut body parts off, and start preventing it, and start identifying these environmental contaminants, including pesticides, right? It's ridiculous. So back to my poster child. So in 2015, as you all, I'm sure, probably know, the World Health Organization's Cancer Experts, International Agency for Research on Cancer, decided to take a look at glyphosate. A number of independent studies, as well as company studies, but a number of independent studies have been done over the past few decades as glyphosate use has increased. Scientists all around the world have done toxicology studies, animal studies, as well as looking at human exposures and epidemiology work, and done some mechanistic looks at the chemical, as well as not only glyphosate by itself, but they've also looked in some cases at the formulated Roundup brands. And so the International Agency for Research on Cancer, what they do, they don't do new research, they look at the published peer-reviewed work that's out there, and they weigh it and they analyze it, and then they come up with a classification. And what they did with glyphosate was they found that it was a probable human carcinogen. They classified it as a 2A. And I'll give you just a little bit more on that. They found sufficient evidence, they put it all together, sufficient evidence in the lab animals, the tox, limited evidence of cancer in humans, and strong evidence of DNA damage. They looked at people who lived in areas where there had been aerial spraying of glyphosate and they were exposed in that way, and they could see DNA damage in those individuals and compared them to control groups. So it was pretty stark. And when they put it all together, this is what they came up with. Now, this classification in March of 2015, I think I might remember, now I don't remember the date, March 20, I think, because that's when the world changed, everything exploded, Monsanto lost its mind. And they were outraged at this. And I remember I worked at Reuters at the time, and I was talking to Hugh Grant, the chairman of Monsanto, and they were outraged, stunned, shocked, surprised, outraged. How could this happen? There's absolutely no evidence that this chemical can cause cancer. It's ridiculous. These people were relying on junk science and were politically motivated and had all sorts of agendas, and it was a terrible thing, and no one should believe it. They've continued to do this for the past 3 years, and they've been so successful that in February of this year, February the 6th, I believe it was, the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee held a hearing specifically to attack IARC and to consider and discuss options for defunding IARC, to strip funding from our international cancer scientists, specifically because they found that glyphosate was a probable human carcinogen. The IARC classification prompted an explosion of litigation as well. 3,500, very conservative number now, 3,500 plaintiffs roughly around the United States are suing Monsanto. These are people who either have developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma or they're survivors if they died from non-Hodgkin lymphoma. They're suing in state and federal court. All of these lawsuits, they're almost verbatim. They allege that Monsanto's Roundup caused them to develop non-Hodgkin lymphoma and that Monsanto knew and covered up the risks. The first trial is scheduled in San Francisco County, June 18 of this year, and I will be there. I can't wait. It'll be fascinating. The lawyers involved tell me that they have well over 10,000 plaintiffs, waiting in the wings. So we shall see. Monsanto, if you've followed this at all, is very concerned about this. They've filed motions to try to get all of these lawsuits dismissed. They've been unsuccessful. The case that is going to trial June 18, the man, they're not sure that he will survive until June 18. And Monsanto is trying very hard to get that continued. They want to delay that trial, and the judges said, no, we're not going to do that. But what has happened through this litigation, you've heard about the Monsanto papers, I'm sure. What's happened through the litigation is Monsanto's been forced to turn over millions of pages of internal reports and documents, emails and memos and different study drafting things that they've been doing. And those, along with Freedom of Information documents that I've gotten and my colleagues at U.S. Right to Know, we get those from EPA, USDA, FDA, and various state universities. When you put all of those together, it's a pretty incredible picture of collusion and deception and deceit. When I was asked to speak to the European Parliament in October, and the title of my presentation was Decades of Deceit. They had asked me to speak about Monsanto and glyphosate. And as I was sitting there about to address, I thought, God, that's a really strong title, like Decades of Deceit, am I okay with that? And then I thought, well, because that's what it is, right? I mean, that's what it is. It's decades of deception. What the documents show, I can't put it all in a presentation. I could put it in a book. You could read the book. But what the documents show are all of these different things. You've heard maybe about the ghostwritten research papers that assert glyphosate safety for publication and regulatory review. Then there are alternative assessments provided for studies that indicate harm. So if a regulator is looking at a study and says, gosh, this looks like it causes cancer, Monsanto will then give them the rationale for how to interpret the data in a different way. They have networks of European and US scientists that push the safety message to lawmakers and regulators, but they appear to be independent, so they appear to be more authoritative and authentic. But behind the scenes, we see documents that show that Monsanto's helping them or telling them what to say or assigning them a task. We have public relations teams that are ghostwriting articles and blogs that appear, up on the web, on different sites on the web, in different magazines. And again, they look like they're independent. They look like they're coming from an independent scientist. They form front groups. You heard about that a little bit earlier. These front groups work to discredit scientists. They work to discredit IARC or any other scientist or individual or journalist like me and others who tries to speak out or address this. What else have they done? They've provided the EPA with talking points to address. I mean, that one got me when I saw it. I was like, talking points from Monsanto to the EPA? And one thing I'll talk about a little bit later that I thought was really outrageous, they actually have blocked safety reviews from the Health and Human Services, from National Toxicology Program. Monsanto was able to block a review of that. These are some of the emails that are fun to look at. So even though Monsanto claimed it was so surprised and so outraged and shocked that IARC could come up with a 2A probable human carcinogen, you can see in the emails that Monsanto kind of thought that was where things were going to go. And they were very worried about this when they learned that IARC was going to look at glyphosate. You see in the memos, what we've long been concerned about has happened. Glyphosate is on for IARC review. These are from the fall of 2014. The emails talk about lining up help, trying to get help from independent scientists. They're girding for battle. They know what's going to come. They're talking about getting money together. They're talking about the fight that's going to come ahead. They talk about how vulnerable they are with the science. You see here in this memo, again, this is before IARC met. They say we should assume and prepare for the outcome of a 2B, possible human, or a 2A, probable human carcinogen. They knew it was coming. This is the IARC preparedness and engagement plan This, again, was before IARC even met. They knew it was going to come. They knew the science was there. They knew they were vulnerable. They knew that, so they start laying out the plan of how to discredit IARC. I mean, it's brilliant, I guess. But, you know, it illustrates what I think is a long pattern. This didn't just begin with the IARC classification. This began in the 1980s, the late 1970s, maybe we could say. If you go back through EPA archives, which I've done, and it takes a long time, and it's really boring, but it's not boring all the time. I mean, you can see from the very beginning, whenever there was a sign of concern or harm associated with this pesticide, Monsanto figures out a way to make it go away, to tamp it down, to silence the person who's raising the alarm bells. This is another thing that came out from the emails. This pertains to the ghostwriting. This is an internal email, Bill Hayden's. And this is, again, they're talking about IARC, and they want to head off IARC. They want to discredit IARC. So they're trying to figure out how to get another paper written. And you see William Hayden saying an option would be to add Grime and Keir or Kirkland. We'll have their names on the publications, keeping the cost down, doing the writing. They would just edit and sign their names, so to speak. Recall that is how we handled Williams, Crows, and Monroe. So what they're saying is they're going to pay scientists to put their names on it, but Monsanto scientists will actually write this. And Williams, Crows, and Monroe is a famous, if you can say that about a paper, I don't know, but it's one of the most highly regarded papers by regulators. It's been cited hundreds of times. It's cited by the EPA at the very top of its evaluation of glyphosate as a paper that they have relied on. This is the paper, Safety Evaluation and Risk Assessment. You can see the paper found that Roundup does not pose a health risk. No effects, fertility, reproductive. Glyphosate is non-carcinogenic. And, you know, this is very nice. It doesn't say anywhere on it that Monsanto just paid the scientists to sign their names. Another example, David Saltmiris, this is a different Monsanto scientist. He's bragging about this. This was an internal evaluation for, you know, what kind of bonus he's going to get. And he's bragging that he ghostwrote the cancer review paper Grime et al. 2015. And this Grime paper, again, was cited by EPA in its risk assessment of glyphosate as being a very important paper. So here's the paper. Now, Saltmiris was on this one. He referred to it as ghostwriting. I'm not sure I would. He did. Grime is an 82-year-old German scientist that some people are not sure actually does a lot of work anymore. So it seems that when Saltmiris is talking about ghostwriting it, even though Grime is listed as the lead author, a lot of people believe that maybe he didn't do much writing at all. And again, this paper comes up with no evidence of a carcinogenic effect related to glyphosate. Compelling weight of evidence support the conclusion glyphosate does not present a concern with respect to carcinogenic potential. This one was a doozy. This was specifically designed to counter IARC, and Monsanto came out and said they were going to hire a group, Intertech, to hire scientists to do an independent review of glyphosate safety and of IARC's papers. And Monsanto was really, you know, we are hands off, we don't have anything to do with this. The acknowledgments there say neither any Monsanto company employees nor any attorneys reviewed any of the expert panel manuscripts prior to submission to the journals. This was a series of papers. They were published in this peer-reviewed journal. They have this disclaimer, this acknowledgement that no company employees from Monsanto looked at this. And you look in the documents from Monsanto, and they're talking, I mean, it's all over. They're writing the draft, they're doing this, they're editing, they're changing things, they're moving things around, they're getting in an argument with one of the authors who was supposed to be on it. I don't know if you can you see that? Yeah, you can see that. These are very clearly tampered with or ghostwritten by Monsanto. But still, if you go to the journal today, you don't see any indication of that. They look to be independent. In fact, that is the title of this work. I could do these all day, but this might be my last example. This is Donna Farmer. I think this is from 2011. She's a toxicologist at Monsanto, and she's writing internally about how she's adding a section in a paper. She's doing some cutting and pasting about POEA, surfactant studies, which is a very big concern. The POEA, it's been banned in Europe now because of the dangers of it. And she's talking about all the work she's doing on this very important paper that's looking at reproductive issues. Well, here is the draft of the paper, but when it's actually published, you can see that her name is no longer on that paper, and there's no mention of Monsanto on that paper, which very helpfully concludes that there's no reproductive harm or concern at all tied to glyphosate. In addition to these scientific papers, we have evidence that Monsanto is engaged in directing policy briefs that are submitted to lawmakers or submitted to regulatory agencies that are promoting product safety and Monsanto strategies. They're editing and outlining presentations, sometimes doing video and PowerPoint presentations for academics and others who are teaching and who are traveling around the world, again, appearing to be independent. But you see in the documents where they're saying, we'll send you the PowerPoint, I'm editing your slides for you, and they're setting up these science outlets that, again, appear like they're independent, and they're pushing out messages to consumers and to medical professionals and to others, and they appear to be independent, but they're backed by the chemical industry. They're propaganda machines. You saw this slide earlier. I think this is a good one. Lists a lot of different, what we call front groups and their connections. I don't know if you've seen this group. Academics Review, Genetic Literacy. I love this one, Campaign for Accuracy in Public Health Research. Doesn't that sound lovely? Sense About Science, Biofortified. All of these say they're independent, but in Monsanto's internal documents, they're listed as partners. And when Monsanto wanted to attack IARC in their preparedness plan, they talk about how they're going to get these guys and others to help them to carry out their attack. They're listed as Tier 2 partners. False fronts. I've already covered up some of this. Websites set up to promote Monsanto's agenda, nonprofits, social media manipulation, a lot of PR experts seeking out bloggers on behalf of Monsanto to get things up like on WebMD and elsewhere, and then journalistic manipulation. Through groups set up as science media centers that push Monsanto sources and story ideas. One such group is called Academics Review. I showed that on the earlier slide. This is a really good example, I think, because if you go to it today, it's independent. You're not going to see Monsanto's name on it anywhere. This was started presumably by a University of Illinois professor who was retiring named Bruce Chassey, to provide thoughtful and independent reviews and criticisms of scientific issues, and to look at journalists and scientists who may be wackos and alert the world to these wacko people. And you can see in Monsanto's internal documents that it was their idea, basically, to set this up. And they are talking to Bruce Chassey. They're sending him a check, first of all, but then they're saying, from my perspective, the problem is one of expert engagement that could be solved by paying experts to provide responses, and the key will be keeping Monsanto in the background so as not to harm the credibility of the information. And this website is still up there today. And gosh, who in this room, now, they've gone after me. I got at least 2 articles about me on that website, I think, while I was at Reuters, and I think Tyrone Hayes has been written about. New York Times, Eric Lipton is a terrible reporter, and they go after. It's a whole lot of folks that they've gone after. This is what they do. This is what I was talking about earlier. This was another example that we found in all the records. In 2015, the Health and Human Services ATSDR, which is sort of a sister unit to CDC, or it's see if I can remember the name. Toxic Substances and Disease, ATSDR, Disease Registry. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, wanted to take a look at glyphosate as well. in 2015. Actually, they had already started it. Monsanto got wind of it, did not want it to happen. You can see in their internal emails, they're saying, we're trying to do everything we can to keep from having a domestic IARC occur with this group. ATSDR is very conservative, very IARC. Again, they know what the science says. So what they did, you can see in the documents, they got in touch with at least 3, maybe more, we see in the documents 3 top EPA officials and said, yeah, we need some help with this. We need this to go away. We don't like this. Monsanto's argument was it was duplicative government resources. They wanted to save the taxpayer dollars. So, boy, the EPA jumped, and I wrote about this in the book, and you could read about it. I've written articles, so you can see this article, but EPA jumped. I mean, it was like within an hour of that first email going to the top guy, Jim Jones, who's the top guy at the Pesticide Programs Department of EPA, he's moving, like within an hour, and I thought, does the government work that fast for any of us, like ever? I don't know. So anyway, they were ultimately successful. ATSDR pushed back a little bit a few times. Over, you see this, you can track it over a few months. ATSDR pushes back. We don't think it's duplicative. We think we're doing important work. EPA keeps saying no. Monsanto's in there. Finally, ATSDR says, fine, we're done. We may still see something from them. They've said that they eventually will do something, but it's 2018. That was 2015, so we'll see. So what has happened? You saw a portion of this map, I think, earlier. All of this manipulation and this pushing and these front groups and this, we've seen the use of glyphosate surge from the mid-90s to, this is old a bit, but you can see through this map, we've gone from about 40 million pounds a year on average in the mid-90s to about 300 million pounds used annually now. And a big part of that, of course, is not only the propaganda, but it was the introduction of genetically engineered crops that encouraged farmers to use these glyphosate products. And the important thing to note is that Monsanto's patent was expiring on the U.S. in the year 2000. When they introduced these crops, it wasn't about feeding the world, it wasn't about helping farmers, it was about locking in market share because their patent was about to expire and they didn't want to lose that lucrative business. This is from an investor note that Monsanto sent out back in the early 2000s, right after their patent expired, and they were reassuring investors and saying, look at this, not only has use increased, but our share is really, really strong. So it wasn't a secret when they introduced this. It's never about the farmer. It's about profit and market share. And what has happened with all of this, of course, is that we've had an explosion now of superweeds with all of this use of Roundup and glyphosate. This is a water hemp, I think, in Illinois. And I was really surprised when I started hearing about these, and I thought, farmers were telling me about these things, and I'm like, a superweed, who cares? Until I went out into the field and started seeing these things. They're taller and they're trying. Farmers in the South are having a heck of a time with these things. You can't spray them. You can't get rid of them in many cases if they get out of control in your fields. And so farmers are fighting ever more diligently, spraying 2 or 3 times more glyphosate and looking for other herbicides. And now we have dicamba and 2,4-D and loaded on top of the glyphosate in these 2,4-D and dicamba and glyphosate-resistant crops. You all know about that. This is a chart. Do we see part of that? This is the glyphosate-resistant weeds worldwide. And again, that number, we're up way above that now. And where that's left us, of course, is it's in our food because we're growing our food with glyphosate. This is just an example. This was done by a consumer group to just give you an example of how many commonly consumed foods contain glyphosate residues. I've done a number of FOIA requests. FDA is a particular stick in my side, I guess, I don't know. The FDA and the USDA both annually, you saw a slide earlier today, both USDA and FDA annually are charged with testing the nation's food supply for residues, pesticide residues, and they've been doing it for 30-some years. Both of them have been criticized sharply by the Government Accountability Office because both of them routinely do not test for glyphosate. Decades of testing, but never for glyphosate, even though it's the most widely used chemical in the world. So after they got hit by GAO, FDA said, all right, fine, we'll test for glyphosate. So I got wind of this in early 2016, and they confirmed to me that they would indeed start testing for glyphosate. That was February of 2016. They still have not publicly released any information, any data. I've had to get all of this from Freedom of Information, and what we found is an FDA chemist in Atlanta was testing honey samples, even organic honey, pulled them from store shelves. Every single sample contained glyphosate residues, and some of it at levels that were illegal in Europe. We don't have a legal limit in the United States. All of it presumably is illegal. I was very concerned about this. FDA hadn't done anything, EPA hadn't done anything, and they don't want to talk about it. This very same chemist also found glyphosate in oatmeal, baby oatmeal products that were found on store shelves. Again, this is an interesting memo I just got in a recent Freedom of Information Act. This is another chemist. This guy's out of Arkansas, and he was trying to find stuff that didn't have glyphosate, and I have brought wheat crackers, granola cereal, and cornmeal from home, and there's a fair amount in all of them. And if you can see, he's saying broccoli is really the only thing that he can find that doesn't have glyphosate in it. The USDA said a year ago, again, internal memos, internal reports, that they were going to start testing for glyphosate. It was supposed to start April 2017, and then by April 1st, that plan had mysteriously gone away, and they're not sure when or if they're ever going to do it. And it's worth noting, I'm intrigued because this June 18 trial, the lawyers for Monsanto specifically have asked the plaintiffs to be barred from mentioning anything about glyphosate residues in foods. At the same time that USDA and FDA are not reporting any glyphosate residues in foods. I don't know. University of California, San Diego School of Medicine put this out in October just of this last year. They've been tracking glyphosate levels in people for quite some time, 20 years, I think, since mid-90s, and shows that both the incidence of exposure and the levels of glyphosate found in urine are up just dramatically. So it's in us. And again, this is bigger than glyphosate, so I like to show this. This actually was from a 2015 report. You saw data earlier, if you were here, that another speaker had from 2016, but the 2015 data showed 85% of foods tested had pesticide residues in them. Fungicides, insecticides, potatoes, grapes, green beans, strawberries. One sample of strawberries had more than 20 different pesticides in that one sample of strawberries. And this is from the most recent available from the FDA's pesticide residue testing. Again, they don't do glyphosate, but they do look at others. They don't do as many as USDA, about 6,000 food samples, 51.2% of domestic, 43.2% contain pesticides, and then 80% of the fruits show the pesticide residues, with 2% at illegal levels. Oh yeah, this is a fun one, chlorpyrifos. So this is the one marketed by Dow Chemical that we all know, the science knows, the EPA scientists know, cause neurodevelopmental damage in children. It's the 4th most prevalent pesticide found now in our food supply, according to FDA. Even though EPA says it's on their website, they cannot vouch for this any level as safe anymore in food and water. And yet it's the 4th most prevalent in our food supply, and we're not doing anything about it. And this is why I do, this is because we have kids, and we feed our kids, and our kids are eating this. And chlorpyrifos and these other pesticides, as earlier speakers have noted, are very damaging to our children in these key developmental times. This is from Pediatricians Concerned About Childhood Pesticide Exposure, American Academy of Pediatrics, calling for greater protections from toxic exposures. This was a few years ago, and I don't feel like we're getting there. This is the paper that I mentioned earlier from Linda Birnbaum, and this wonderful quote about existing U.S. regulations not keeping pace with our scientific advances. The most vulnerable population, our children, face the highest risks. Now, you should know that this paper, which sounds important, and we should all pay attention to it, drew the ire of our Science, Space, and Technology Committee Chairman, Lamar Smith, who called for Linda Birnbaum to be investigated for writing this statement. Because how dare she say, he said, I think his allegation was that she was lobbying, she was advocating for public policy, which you're not supposed to do as a government scientist, because she was calling for greater protection of public health. So she's in the hot seat. And Rachel Carson, we always have to quote Rachel Carson. I love Rachel Carson. But this is so important. This is powerful. It's a long quote, but if having endured much, right, we have at last asserted our right to know, and if by knowing we have concluded we are being asked to take senseless and frightening risks, then we should no longer accept the counsel of those who tell us that we must fill our world with poisonous chemicals. We should look about and see what other courses open to us. 2 shameless plugs, U.S. Right to Know. So I left Reuters at the end of 2015, so I guess I've been there a while now. We're really small and really poor, and all we do pretty much is file Freedom of Information Act requests and mine court documents and put them up on our website so that people don't have to pay PACER, the federal court filing system. They can get the documents free on our website, and we share them with other media, and we, try to help educate and inform the public so that you can make decisions about what public policy you want to support or not support, what kind of food you want to buy or not buy. We don't advocate, we don't lobby, we just dig up the information and we share it, and we hope that it's useful for people. And then, shameless plug number 2. It's the book it's the book that Monsanto really doesn't want you to read, which is really true. They've gone after it quite heavily, the agrochemical industry. But, all I can say is, they tell us not to worry. They tell us, one of the reviews from Biofortified, one of their partners, called this book hogwash. They say you shouldn't worry about pesticides in your food, you shouldn't worry about it in your water, you shouldn't worry about pesticides in your body. There's no evidence that it's tied to cancer. They tell us not to worry. They're counting their profits, and we're all getting cancer. So I say it's not a feel-good story, but I feel like it's a story that has to be told. And thanks for letting me tell it tonight.